Senate candidates Adam Hamilton and Roger Marshall, both in the Wichita area this week to speak with voters about their concerns. Sophia Drinander joins us from the newsroom with more details tonight. Sophia.
Rachel, yes, both Hamilton and Marshall visited the area. Hamilton's focus was on public education. Marshall focused on supporting small businesses, but they do share one priority: fixing the economy. Hamilton visited Wichita Heights High School. He spoke with educators about their priorities, and he says Wichita should be proud of their school district, and says one thing he's heard is that the federal government is underfunding special education. He says that will be one of his priorities. Marshall was in Goddard visiting several senior living centers, as well as Goddard's Welcome Area and Research Hub. He says the federal government needs to continue supporting rural areas. He says he knows people are dissatisfied with the economy, but he believes the federal government is on track to improving that.
The federal government had promised that there would be certain funds coming to help underwrite the cost of special education. Every school district, every place, every town I visited, they've said the same thing. Those funds have not come through.
My focus has been and will continue to be to work on the cost of living issues that face us. Look, under the previous administration, we saw the cost of gas, we saw the groceries, we saw health care, housing all go up.
Both Hamilton and Marshall addressed questions about a possible debate. They both claim to have been reaching out to each other with no response, but they tell me there are some tentative plans in place for that debate.